Hola, ¿qué tal? Muy buenas noches. Muchas gracias por estar aquí con nosotros en este miércoles de SOMA. El día de hoy está Roy Dowell, quien es un artista interesado en las culturas del mundo, en la historia del arte y del diseño. En su trabajo hay una necesidad por crear, decorar, inventar un lenguaje personal basado en un amplio conocimiento de signos, símbolos y preocupaciones formales. Su trabajo se encuentra en diversas colecciones, como en la colección del Jumex, en la colección Eli Broad, entre muchos otros. La dinámica del día de hoy es que Roy va a presentar un poco su proyecto, pero él quiere animarles a platicar con él, a dialogar con él y a que puedan hacer varias preguntas. Entonces, pues, si las preguntas son en español, está Alex aquí con nosotros, quien puede traducirlas para que Roy pueda entender. Y pues nada, muchísimas gracias. La plática es en inglés, entonces, muchas gracias, Roy.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction. And first of all, let me start by apologizing that I'm not able to do this in Spanish. My Spanish is very, very bad. And it would be an embarrassment, and I'm going to try not to embarrass myself. So, I don't assume that very many people know what my work is. And so I'm going to show you about 40 images of the last couple of years worth of work. When I show my work, I don't like very much to talk too long as an introduction. I will give a little bit of an introduction as to why I do lectures this way. In that I will give a few words, then I'm just going to show images. If you have questions during the images, I'm happy to answer them then, but I want to encourage everyone to ask questions afterwards. I've been a teacher, and I started a graduate program not too dissimilar from SOMA about 35 years ago. And during that time, I also continued to have my own practice, and although it was a challenge to try and keep them together. Now that I no longer teach, I retired a couple of years ago. Actually, I didn't retire, I quit a couple of years ago. And I've only been almost every single day of that time in my studio. And so what I'm going to show you is the evidence of two shows that I did in the last 2.5 years. Plus, at the very end, there are two sculptures that are considerably older. Most of what I'm showing you are paintings. All except for those two pieces are paintings. They're all fairly modest in scale, anything from 6 feet in one direction to considerably smaller, to something like this size. The size is not really so important to me, except that I don't like working very large. I like the intimacy of a smaller image where the work is for 1 or 2 people to look at a time. It's not so public. It's really about your relationship with it and how the viewer can find themselves in the work. The work has a lot of references. It's not important that you know them, but for me, it's important in the construction of the work. But it is, the work is based in a lot of different ways of working. Decoration is certainly something that's very important to me, but decoration not just for decoration's sake. Decoration is, or was, or things that are decorated at one point or another, that decoration had meaning. And although I don't always know the meaning, or we don't always know the meaning, we do know that it had a start. It started with something. And in some ways, I'm trying to not recreate it, but to give it another life, to give it another meaning, or to bring out its meaning in what I'm doing. The work is all, for the most part, on canvas. There are a few pieces on paper. As I said, they're 6 feet in any direction or is much smaller, down to about a foot or 17 inches. a third of a meter to a quarter of a meter. Can I say to start? One of the things that has been very important in my work is that I was a teacher, and that I was, because I was a teacher, I had to look at a lot of different people's work for a lot of different reasons. And I had to start to speak the language that they spoke, the visual language that they spoke. I had to understand why they were doing things that they were doing. And that was a challenge. It was also something that was really fun, because I find that I like to collect information, and my work is very much about the idea of putting things together that are disparate, that don't necessarily go together, but finding a way of fitting them together and making sense out of them, making something new out of them, or taking something that's old and giving it a new life. I am evidence of dinosaurs still exist on this planet. I'm 72 years old. I'm a white male, and I paint. And that's kind of being a bit of a dinosaur these days. But I also understand that it's the only language I know how to speak, other than English, is painting. And that's what I do and what I enjoy. And I make my work for you. I make my work for my audience, because I want you to find yourself in it, to locate yourself in it, to decipher it, decode it. Not that there's an answer, not that there's something hidden in there to get, but there hopefully are a lot of things in there to get, and I hope that you will. So let's start. And as I said, questions are very important to me. I don't like just talking about my work. I like responding to questions. One, it makes the job easier for me, because then you're directing me and telling me what you want to know, telling me what you want to discuss, rather than me telling you what I want you to know. And I find that when I do just give a lecture about my work, I get myself stuck in corners and things that are not so interesting. Okay. Things that are not quite so, things that are not quite so interesting, or that maybe go off on a tangent that are not so neat, and it's not so necessary for you to hear. So please direct me, give me directions. I'll leave each piece up for about 20 seconds, and if you want them to stay up longer, that's fine. Yes.
Hola.
Thank you. No, first, thank you for being here and sharing with us your work. First question I have is, all the paintings you're showing us are part from the same series of paintings, or they're different?
They were done at more or less sequential, and over the period, this first group, basically covering, well, there's 3 shows in here, but basically covering 2 of them, and I wouldn't say that they're a series. In fact, this first group, after I did this show, and this piece was in that show, and as I was leaving the gallery, which had a glass facade, I turned around and looked at it and I thought, that looks like a group show. Looks like a lot of people did that show. And the next group that you'll see, maybe another 6 or 7 more after this one, I tried very hard to make them more cohesive. I don't work in series. I don't work in groups. I do one painting at a time, and each one gets the attention that it needs. And I'm not trying to make them all fit together. But I felt at some point that was not maybe the best approach, and that people were starting to get very confused by the work because it goes in all different directions. And you're right in your perception, it does. So I tried, after this first group of work, I tried to make them a bit more cohesive. Whether I succeeded or not, I don't know, but I did try that, so.
Thank you. And maybe another question.
Mhm.
I don't know if I understood well in the beginning. You were mentioning that every painting that you made, they had all the starting points. And maybe this painting and the one before, what was your starting point, or for this group of paintings?
The starting points of the paintings are different for each one. There's nothing consistent about them. In this case, this basic sort of hat shape, the sombrero shape, was taken off the side of a Mexican restaurant in Los Angeles. Didn't look exactly like that, but it was more or less that shape. And I put it into a different kind of environment that it was in. It wasn't that I was using it as a sombrero or as anything other than this sort of shape that caught my eye and that I was interested in. But in every case, I will choose something because I feel that it can go farther than what it is, that it can be interpreted in many different ways. I should have said at the beginning also that I don't give my work titles. I give them nicknames. Sometimes I will title them for myself, but those never become public. Partly because when I've given things titles years later, I think that was stupid. That's really embarrassing. Why did I do that? And also because I don't want to focus the viewer's attention on what I'm saying about it, about what the title might say or what it might imply. I want the viewer to come to their conclusions on their own. I mean, I could call this any number of things. I could have poetic titles, it could have literal titles, but I just decided that the easiest way is to not give anything a title, which is why this talk was called Pictures Without Words, or Pictures Without Names, because they don't have names. I give everything an identification number, which I forget as soon as I've given it to them. And I don't want language. That's not completely true, but I'll finish what I was saying. I don't want language to be attached to them. Language, of course, is attached to them, but I don't want to give them a literal definition or a definition in terms of a title.
Thank you.
It's a good question. I have a very strong relationship with my work when I'm making it. And one of the articles that was written about my work a number of years ago was called Small Battles. And the writer talked about my work as being battles, as being fights that I was having with the painting. And because the paintings oftentimes look very composed and very put together, but they're the surfaces, which you can't see in the photographs so well, would indicate that there's a little bit more going on, that they've been fought with. And so I don't know. I don't know if I'm answering your question very well. I think once I'm done with the work, it's done, and I move on to the next one. I don't obsess over that. And I look at my work many years after I've done it, and I think, I don't remember making that. Or something else I say often is, gee, I was a lot better then than I am now. So I have a relationship with my work, but I have to say that once it's done, it's kind of out of my hands for a while. I mean, it's out of my hands anyway. It's, you know, once it's done, it's done. And I rarely go back, although I have more recently gone back into work, older work, and redone it or reworked it or added to it. But once it's done, it's kind of done, and I put it away. It gets shown or it doesn't get shown, and that's, you know, that's its life, and I move on to the next one.
Do you develop your work while you work on it, or
it's never preconceptualized. I don't do drawings. I don't do plans. There will be, in the case of this piece, there was something that I had seen in an auction catalog of textiles, which is something I look at a lot of auction catalogs for information. And I liked an element of something that I saw on this piece that was being put up for auction. It was the basis for this. Doesn't look anything like this, like what it ended up being, but it was the basis for it. Somewhat, yeah.
when do you decide to stop?
When they're done. when there's nothing more that can be done. It's a question that I get a lot. Like, when do I know it's done? I think a lot of artists get that question. There's nothing more to do. It has got the information that it needs to have. Both. I mean, you know, if I make rules for myself, I break them immediately. I'm full of contradictions, and I'm full of things like that. Where I'll say, well, yes, I do it this way. Well, once or twice, and then I do it differently. I'm not interested in being terribly consistent, and I'm not a terribly consistent person. So. Mhm.
I have a question. Do you use other techniques like screen printing or collage or just painting?
No, they're all just painted, although my work comes out of collage. For about 12 years, 15 years, I only made collages. Some quite small, some very large, like many, many feet. And I think that I still work with the sense of collage, where I'm superimposing things, I'm bringing things together that are disparate, from disparate sources. But these are all paintings. There's no other technology in them, as minimal as the technology that I've ever used. There's no other technology in them, they're just paint. Actually, this painting, which is a couple of years old now, I had forgotten where the image came from. It looks a bit like a car, from an aerial view of a car. And I was taking a friend to the Artes Populares here in Mexico City a couple of weeks ago. And there's a very large embroidery from Hidalgo. It's many different scenes going on. And in it, there's this, something similar to this, that's actually sending out fireworks. And which is where it came from, but I'd forgotten where it came from until I saw it the other day again. And it got changed. I mean, I don't know that you would recognize this as coming from that source, but it did.
Excuse me, sorry. I have actually a question about it, because when I see this, I kind of think about two painters. First of all, being Mondrian. I think of Mondrian, and I think about Miro as well. So Miro, the Spanish painter.
Yeah, okay.
So I wanted to ask, like, what are your references in painting?
They're different for every painting. This one, Mondrian, was certainly somebody I thought about. I don't know that he would have been so happy about my interpretation of his work. But I wanted that area, the brightly colored area, to read a bit like a stained glass window as well. And the sort of the oddity of the stained glass window in this thing that looks a little bit like a go-kart or a sports car, which is actually none of those things, is sort of some of the games that I'm interested in playing in the work, where I'm pulling things together that look like something, but they're not that. But they could be something else, but they're not necessarily that either. So just the fluidity of imagery and the fluidity of how it can be pinned down as one thing, and it usually can't be pinned down as just one thing.
Roy, I have a question for you from someone on the live recording. And it is, you spoke a little bit about it earlier in the introduction, but if you could speak a little bit more about your relationship with your students and as a lecturer, and how that has influenced your work today.
Oftentimes when I'm working, I will remember things that I've said to students, and I thought, gee, did I really tell them that? Why? Why did I tell them that? I think I'm going back to what I said earlier, that learning how to look at other people's work and to help them to develop the language that was necessary for them to express what it is that they were trying to express has helped me to, well, to do the same for myself. You know, to understand the languages that I'm speaking in. And I do see all of this as in terms of language. And to help me to understand, well, why am I using that in this case? What does it mean for me, and how is the viewer going to see this? I can't always calculate how the viewer is going to see something. In fact, I very often miscalculate how the viewer will see something. But I think the openness that a teacher has to have for the needs of their students has maybe translated to the openness I have to have for the needs of each one of these paintings. Because each one of them has a different need, a different way of being, a different way of existing, and different references and different buttons that it may push. So I think those are some of the things that came out of teaching. I mean, I created a graduate program. I was given the job, I was offered a job to create a graduate program. And what I did was to go back and think about my graduate experience and what I didn't get. And I developed this graduate program all around what I felt I didn't get, or students who were in school when I was there, what we weren't getting. So I made my students write. I made my students learn to speak about their work a little bit better. I offered a lot of things to the students that oftentimes they resisted at first until they realized that these are things that they were going to need and that I had to learn after school. I didn't get them when I was in school. And a lot of people of my generation weren't given those kinds of things. They weren't encouraged to look at art as a profession or as being serious about it in the way that I was. So I think, you know, those are some of the things that being a teacher helped me with my own work.
Thank you.
Actually, this painting is an example of something, of two very literal, two things that I stole. Let's put it that way. I literally stole them from other artists. The little blue area at the bottom with the two white towers was taken from Raoul Dufy's giant mural that's in the Modern Art Museum in Paris. And the large circular shape is taken from a tantric drawing from the 17th century or something. And it was really just an exercise in putting things together that just didn't seem to have any reference to each other whatsoever and making them make sense. The sense is completely a subjective one. It doesn't really make any sense at all, but I liked and I felt that they could exist together in harmony. The thing that I think helps bring it all together is the orange stripe at the top, which is sort of that thing that in a way works like Scotch tape or like some sort of tape. It's just holding it all together. But there were these two images that I was really struck by when I saw them for different reasons. And then the orange stripe that I felt was the thing that could help hold them all together. I know that probably made absolutely no sense, but that's kind of the way I think about them. Well, in and of itself, it's not so important, but I understand the need to decorate. And it's a human need to decorate. The clothes we wear, the tattoos, the jewelry, whatever, these are all decorations. But they also all have meaning. We choose them for very specific reasons, personal reasons. And these things, say the circular shape, which is not anything in particular, it was an invented form, but probably exists somewhere in some culture, something very similar to that. It can be reduced to decoration, but it's not decoration alone. It started with meaning. It had a meaning to begin with. And although I might not always know what that meaning is, I do understand that it has meaning, and I'm interested in how the weight that carries when you put it into a picture. That answer your question?
There we are. We spoke a little bit earlier about travel and moving in your life often. And I can't help but wonder how that's influenced your work. I see a lot of these paintings translate into city plans, maps, landscapes. And yeah, I'm just wondering if maybe there's some sort of personal connection with what you've seen and where you've lived.
Well, certainly there's a relationship to what I've seen and moving around in my life. I was telling Alex earlier today that I've moved when I was young. I moved 18 times by the time I was 18. And my parents liked to move. My father used to joke, the ashtrays are dirty, let's move. And I've moved a lot as an adult on my own, although not quite as much as that. But and every move has been to a different kind of environment. Most of my moves were made within the United States, but each part of the United States has very different and distinct personalities. So there were things about the native population of that area, or things that were current that were interesting to me that I have amassed in my index of information. So moving was important to me, although I can't say specifically that it led to anything in the work, but I think it allowed me the experience of trying to find a normalization within each situation that I was in. And I find these pieces very normal to me. This is my life. I mean, this is sort of the things that make sense to me. I can't always say why they make sense, but they seem to make a lot of sense to me. So they get depicted in the way they do in my work. But the dislocation that I had in my life, I don't know that it literally shows up in the work very well. I'm not sure how well this one translates. It's an installation shot. You can see two of the paintings that I showed earlier there. This painting in the large painting in the front, which is one of the biggest paintings I've done recently, which is about 6.5 feet by 5 feet, 6.5 feet high by 5 feet wide, is actually taken very literally from this little woven straw hat from Nagaland, which is in Upper India. And it looked so much like it could be so many different things. And in the environment that I put it in, it becomes maybe even more things. And it's a fairly accurate rendering of what that little hat looked like, which is a completely abstract, strange little object. And it's one of the more literal pieces that I've done.
Hi, I have a question.
Mhm.
So I'm really interested in the whole idea of trying to make sense of things that wouldn't otherwise be connected or related to each other. I would like to kind of hear more about your use of color and texture as well, and how those kind of are mechanisms which you rely heavily on to kind of give meaning to things which otherwise wouldn't have meaning, or recycling meanings.
Well, you can see I'm not afraid of color. It's very hard for me to be subtle when I'm making work, because I don't feel that it's well, I think the aggression that the work has, I think my work is fairly aggressive. It's hard to, in a group show, it's hard to hang my work near anybody else's because it just kind of swallows what's around it. And that's not why I use bright colors, but I respond to the strength of the color and match that with what I think is the strength of the image. There are paintings that I'm doing now that are much more subtle, but I think they still probably come off as being pretty aggressive. And I think I'm only answering part of your question. But, the texture is only implied. There's not a lot of physical texture in the work. There's some, depending on the painting, but it's only implied. It's almost manufactured, made to look like there's texture. In a lot of the paintings, there are sequences or areas of massive dots. That's not a reference to Kusama. That's just creating an atmosphere and creating a texture. And then starting in some of the paintings like this one that's up there now, there's a lot of very thin paint overlapping each other. So there are many layers of things that you're seeing through, and that creates a kind of texture or a kind of a screen that you're observing something through. But in terms of physical texture, that existed in some of the sculptures that I've done, but not so much in the painting. I respond to very textural work, but I don't know how to make it myself.
So I do have a question, and it's, why do you keep on painting? Why?
I'm trying to get it right.
Why do you keep on painting? Haven't you felt the need of going back to collage or using other materials? I'm really interested in knowing.
I think I have thought about going back to collage, and every once in a while I'll sort of stab at something, but I sort of feel like I exhausted it. I did a lot. I did many hundreds of pieces that were all collage, and it was I was very invested in that as a language, but I don't feel that I can bring anything new to it right now. Not that it won't come back later, it may, but I don't feel that I can bring anything to it right now. Why do I keep painting? I keep discovering new things I want to paint. And a lot of the work comes from not just things that I'm interested in, but things in a way that I covet too. It's like, wow, I really love that thing, or I love that surface, or I love that, fill in the blank. And my way of owning it in a way is by making it. You know, I am an avid collector, and I should say that a lot of the things that show up in my work are bits and pieces of things that I've collected over the years. But where they come from is not really so important. What's more important to me is what they've become. And I don't feel that I've exhausted what I can do yet. So I did take a break and make. For a while, I just made sculptures. I took a small break and made mosaics, but the mosaics were based on some of the paintings that or some of the collages that I'd made prior to that. But right now, I'm investigating painting, and that's the language that I'm trying to become more articulate in. Okay, I've shown this painting, and it was up for 3 months in Los Angeles, and I've shown it in a lot of other situations, and nobody has ever asked me who was Jacqueline Manley, which is the name that's written in the back there. And I'll tell you, Jacqueline Manley was a general in the French army in some time, and it was taken out of somebody else's painting, and I just loved the way it was written. And there's a little bit, the black dots that go up the middle there were the buttons on the man's uniform, and there are a few other things like this sort of the smudge that's behind the black circle there was an epaulette. And none of that has any real meaning, except that I just loved the way it looked in that particular painting and thought, well, I'm going to use that. And to the best of my memory, I didn't have a picture of it, but to the best of my memory, that's how it all worked in this little painting of this general that was done by a term that I don't like very much, but an outsider artist, Henry Darger. And Henry Darger had done, for some reason, had done this because it wasn't typical of his work, but had done this little portrait of Jacqueline Manley, General Jacqueline Manley. And there was just something about that, the way that painting was done and its incongruity that I liked very much, and then added the other elements to it and sort of sunk it into this other composition. As I remember it, yeah. In some cases, if I do have a picture of it, then I will refer to the picture. But it's not really so important that I get it. That it be a perfect rendering, no. But I do at times render things that I've seen. But oftentimes they're just like renderings of a drip or something. I mean, it's not something that you would recognize as being realistic or representational at all. But important in the painting.
Hey, Roy, I have a question. I'm over here. Earlier, you mentioned, well, in many of your paintings, we can see that you're trying to express yourself through different symbols and trying to create your own language. Can you elaborate on that? Like, what's the meaning behind each of these symbols?
Say the last part again. What's the meaning?
What's the meaning of the symbols that you put in your paintings? Nothing?
I don't know. No, they all have
Ah.
meaning. They all have meaning. Either an invented meaning or a literal meaning or a historic meaning. But the meaning that they have in the painting is an invention. It's not, I don't use anything for its literal, its literalness. I know that sounds a little evasive and maybe even irresponsible, but when I use something, if it's something that I have taken directly from another source, I do a lot of research on it so that I know that I'm not misusing it or using it in a way that would be, in a sense, disrespectful to what it is. But most of the symbols, like in this case, that what could be read as symbols in here are just invented things. They're nothing specific, and nothing that I saw, nothing I invented.
Okay.
But it's not that they don't exist. They may exist in other cultures or in many cultures, as a lot of symbols do. But they weren't taken from anything directly. In some cases, I take things fairly directly. In this particular case, but in most things, I don't take things very directly. The background of this painting, the sort of white, the two white zigzag shapes, the red and orange, and then the bluish green stripes, come from an American Indian object called a parfleche, which is sort of like a leather envelope that's been painted. Plains Indians from the middle of the United States.
Okay.
And the decoration that they put on things, which did have meaning, I find just visually very attractive, and I want to, I have at times incorporated it into a composition of other things that I feel complement it, contradict it, enhance it, change it, give it a new meaning.
Okay, thank you. And I have another question.
Mhm.
Do you have fun making your work? Or have you sometimes have a painting that you really hated, and once it's out there, you were like, oh, it's actually pretty nice?
There are times when I have fun. I would say there are more times when I'm struggling.
Okay.
I really fight with my paintings to get them to a place where I feel like that's right. That makes sense. It's completely subjective. It's my sense of what makes sense, not what somebody else is saying makes sense. But the surfaces have to be just right. The combinations of things, the clumsiness of them has to be just right. It's not, there's not a formula because everyone is different. And the criteria for the success of any one of them is very different from the next. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you.
I hate the idea of somebody doing a painting that one would call a COVID painting, but I did this painting during COVID, and I sort of call it my COVID painting. Mm-hmm. No, it's literal. In part, yes. There are times when I feel like it's not articulating itself very well. And oftentimes I'll wipe out a painting, I'll paint over it, I'll maybe save a small section of it and rework it or just obliterate it completely and start all over again. But what I started with and what it became are never the same. So if I've obliterated a painting, I don't repaint what was there and try and do it better. It becomes a completely different painting. Oftentimes not even close to what the first one was. But they probably are they're more related than they might look, and that I felt like the first one wasn't going kind of where I wanted it to go or where I thought it could go. And so I'll wipe it out and start all over again with, well, what did I really mean to say? What did I really want to be there instead of what did I do? Because sometimes I'll just start, because I don't plan them out. I have no drawings, no preparation for them. I just start. And I might have in my head the idea that, well, I want these two colors to be together, or I like these, I want to see what happens if I put these two images together or these two patterns together or whatever. But it's never planned out.
Is it the only thing you've seen that you like?
No, something about many of the pictures that I like. Looking at this picture,
Mhm.
Mhm.
I really like that. Maybe closest to art about very easy to make straight. That makes a painting very exciting.
Well, that's part of the intention, is that I don't want it to be too perfect. I mean, I want it to be perfect in my interpretation, but I don't want it to be too well mapped out. And that there are drips, there are, in quotes, mistakes. They're not mistakes because usually they're intended, or if they weren't intended, they stay because I think they work. But I didn't measure out the black dots so that they would be equally distant from each other. I just like, okay, well, I want to fill the space with these black dots. And that's where they fell. Am I going in the right direction? Yes.
We have another question, Ray.
Mhm.
Yeah, I have another question that maybe could be related to the other one.
Mhm.
I'm interested in knowing what's there behind, or if there's something behind this fascination from geometry.
When I was in high school, I took geometry, and about 3 weeks into the class, the teacher said, if you go back to general math, I won't flunk you. I have no understanding or interest in geometry as a thing in itself. The work has a certain kind of geometry to it, which does relate to the other question. And part of that, I think, is just a way of organizing it, of making it not too chaotic to try and hold it together in one way or another. I mean, I rely on a lot of really basic compositional elements, and those come out of geometry or vice versa. But it's not something that I forefront. I mean, certainly in my decision-making processes of how things get composed, there might be a sense of geometry and a sense of balance, certainly balance, but it's not something that I give an enormous amount of attention to. Oh, I should also say this, here. This one and the next 3, I believe, after this are all small pieces, works on paper, which is what I've been doing a lot. And I just finished about 30 pieces that are all this size, that are all very different. I'd like to do them as a show by themselves. Although these were shown already. But there's something about the sort of I'm experimenting with other ways of working on a new material, on this kind of very absorbent paper. And it's very, very thin paint with many, many layers of different colors and building up so that they're much, well, maybe this one not as much as some of the others, but they're much richer than they appear in the photographs. Mm-hmm. Well, I've always used color. It's probably gotten more sophisticated, and there's a bigger range from something very muted to something very bright, as opposed to just hitting you over the head constantly with bright colors. And part of that is this coming out now, where I'm working with these very dirty colors and layering them on top of each other. But then, like the orange dot or the green or the pink or the black, blue or tan there, those get laid on top, although still very thin, and you can see through them, most of them. But they read as being so much brighter than they actually are, just because of the context that they're put into. But I think probably my use of color has gotten more sophisticated and broader, a broader range of color. And what is I work every day. And I love it. I love going to my studio, even though I may be fighting with them. I love the process of going there and fighting with them. They become very diaristic, the work. It's like, this is what I was thinking about today. The smaller pieces actually sometimes take longer than the bigger paintings. I work fairly quickly. It's a few days for each piece. I usually don't listen to music. I don't listen to anything. I have a dog, and the dog and I talk all day. And but other than that, it's a pretty traditional studio practice. I work, from 10 until 6, and go home and have a drink and have dinner and do it again the next day. And I enjoy that. I think in maybe embedded in that question is the idea that there's something, for lack of a better word, magical about the practice of an artist. Artists are just people. we have all the same information that everybody else has. We live the same lives that everybody else has. We just sometimes act on it differently. But I always feel that if I'm interested in something, or if I've made something, I'm not the only one who's done it. Other people have done it too. Other people are interested in this too. And hopefully I'm tapping into some population of people who share an interest in what I've done, or are willing to go there, to go there and to decipher and decode and deconstruct and invent, which is what I do. Okay, this and the next piece are sculptures, and they're a little bit older. They were done probably maybe 6 or 7 years ago. This is about 5 feet tall from the top of the post to the bottom, made of paper mache and painted. This one hangs on the wall. And you saw a painting earlier on that sort of has the same image, although without the color in it. It had white segments in it, and a striped post, which is more accurate to what it was based on. I should say both that piece, the one I just showed, and this one, were both based on things that I saw here in Mexico. This in the Anthropology Museum, or the Ethnographic Museum above the Anthropology Museum. an aspect of this, not literally this. And the one before was something that I bought from an antique dealer many, many years ago here in Mexico. That is my favorite object. And it's just a soccer ball that's all its segments had been painted different colors. It's a half of a soccer ball and kind of very beat up and flattened. And it was attached to an axe handle that was painted with stripes. And I've had that. I wish that I had made it. And people ask me because it looks like something I've made because it's got that aesthetic has kind of gotten incorporated into what I do. People ask me and I didn't. I wish I could say that I did, and I wish I could lie about it and say I made it, but I didn't. It was made for some ceremony and somewhere the person I bought it from didn't know. But it's always been my very favorite object, and it's been in my studio for 25 years or more. This piece is about 4 feet high. Again, it's paper mache with a wood base, but that's covered in paper mache as well. And yeah. Any more questions? That's the end of it. Yes, I do. Primarily textiles from Mexico and Guatemala and some elsewhere, but there's so many things in the world, and if you're going to collect, you're going to go crazy if you try and connect all the dots. So it's better to just say, okay, I'm going to collect things from this area or from this country or from this type of thing, instead of just letting it take you all over the place. And also there's limited space. But I have collected textiles primarily from Oaxaca and some Hidalgo and state of Mexico and a few other places for a long time, 30, 40 years. And they not literally, but they certainly influence my work a lot. No, sometimes I use a roller, sometimes I use paper towels, sometimes I use my hand. Mostly a paintbrush, sponge, different materials, but all, I mean, nothing that's so unusual, you know, not the dog or anything. No, but whatever I think I need to do that particular job. Sergio, you didn't ask me a question.
Genesis for a project, like always find something specific.
No, I think if I wait, and I think this is, I think a lot of artists fall into this, if they wait for inspiration, that's in quotes, but if they wait for inspiration, they don't get anywhere. I go to my studio, whether I have an idea or not, I'm going to start working. And I'll usually just the process will reveal something that I'm interested in or something that I don't want. I hate what I just did. Okay, now what do I do? How do I change it? How do I make it better? So that process is just part of the day-to-day going to work. No, I don't always have a very clear idea of what I'm going to do. In fact, I very rarely have a very clear idea of what I'm going to do, and things change drastically from what I start to how I started to where I finish. Sometimes, and then sometimes they stay right on track. So it's different depending on maybe the clarity of the vision or clarity of the idea, and sometimes just because as I'm working on something, I change my mind. Por favor. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate your questions and I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Roy. Gracias a todos ustedes por venir. Les recuerdo que el próximo miércoles no habrá miércoles de SOMA, pero nos vemos el 15 de febrero. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Horrible.